Hi, everybody. I am here with Andrew McIntosh. You may know him as the principal writer for the BattleTech game and also lead writer on Shadowrun Dragonfall in Hong Kong. He has contributed just thousands, maybe millions of words to these universes. So welcome. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, how's it going, Ryan?
Good. I should also say, I guess, I also had the chance to actually work with you and work on those BattleTech expansions, which was really cool and actually informing a lot of what we're doing with Sea of Legends.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, it was a real pleasure working with you on those, and I'm looking forward to working with you again on this.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm very excited to see what happens when we just throw you into the deep end and say, yeah, to do whatever you want. There are no rules. You get to make it all up yourself. As long as there's pirates involved.
Yeah, I think that I can work with that.
Great. So to let people know, I think a little bit more about you, I was just kind of curious, like for you, how did you start? Like, I know your background was in, art. And so I'm curious, like, how did you go from you worked in games, doing art, to writing for games? How did that happen?
Yeah, so I moved here well, not here, I'm now in Germany, but I moved to Seattle in 2000, and shortly thereafter I went to art school for the purpose of trying to learn what I would need to learn to get to work in the games industry. I landed a job working at a smaller developer in Bellevue. And I wound up doing UI design for them for about 9 years. And, I wound up shortly thereafter between jobs, and I heard that a opportunity was coming up at Harebrained Schemes to work on some mysterious follow-up to Shadowrun Returns. I had been a fan of Shadowrun for pretty much all my life. I mean, not all my life, I'm a little older than that, but since junior high, I'd been a huge fan of the Shadowrun games.
All right, it didn't come out of the womb with a Shadowrun supplement.
I did not, although I did Shadowrun fan art in art class in high school. I did, all sorts of stuff like that. I had wanted to be a writer actually before I really focused on art. I decided that my odds of finding, like a stable job as a writer in games were pretty low, but almost every game studio had an art team. And so I decided that, working in games was what I really wanted to do. And what I wanted to do specifically was tell stories, and whether I was doing that in a visual medium or with the use of narrative and words, either way sounded fine to me. But yeah, I saw that this job opportunity came up at HBS. I was between jobs at the time. And, I was making something in the Shadowrun editor, and it was like, well, what do I have to lose? I've been talking about wanting to write games forever, and I never thought that it would be a possibility, but I knew someone who worked at HBS, and that gave me an opportunity to get whatever I produced looked at. And so I put together a few audition pieces and sent them off, and one thing led to another, and I was able to transition from, working as a UI artist, a little bit of character art stuff too, into writing for games. And that was kind of what started it all off. 6+ years later, I'm still at HBS, still writing.
Wow. So so the first game you wrote was Shadowrun Dragonfall then?
Yeah, that's right.
Which is like a huge game. Like, do you even remember like how many words or pages like went into that?
There were a whole lot of words. I mean, Dragonfall, I know that Brian at HBS gave me a word count at some point for how big that was, but it was like a respectable couple of fantasy novels worth of writing.
Absolutely massive. So that's really interesting, because I'm curious, from your perspective, how being a tabletop role player, how does that influence the way you write games?
Well, I mean, I think that it helped me. So having experience playing tabletop games helps put me in the position both of, sort of the GM, what would make an interesting dramatic opportunity at this point in the story, and the player, like as a player, what do I want to say right now? What is the, maybe what's something that feels like it's going off script that I want to be able to do that I don't expect the game to let me do at this point? And, sort of reconciling those two things together, I think is very helpful in writing game dialogue, sort of giving, the illusion of choice most often, but actual choice when there is the scope to do so. And, figuring out how to fold all that together into something that makes coherent narrative sense.
Yeah, so you're always considering, the player's point of view, while also thinking like a GM, but in the sense of, the game being the GM for the experience is what it comes down to.
Trying to, yeah. I mean, it's all about trying to find the experience that you want to give the player, right? And part of that is the scenario that is being delivered to the player for them to experience, and part of it is their own level of agency in navigating that scenario. And they kind of have to be there for it to be a successful conversation.
Now, so I think those are all great points. I don't think there's much to add there, actually. I think you nailed it there. So I'll just say, yeah. Given like the sort of newer trend between fusing sort of tabletop with apps and with more capabilities you see in video games, like we're trying with Sea of Legends, I'm curious, like from your point of view, what's sort of most exciting about the capabilities of the Sea of Legends app from a storytelling perspective?
Well, I mean, I think that having an app to manage, the sort of the branching paths that an adventure could take, to be able to account for randomness. I think what's interesting about the app to me is that it can automate a lot of the processes that would normally be extremely fiddly in a tabletop game, and present a more streamlined experience to the user that feels very natural. Whereas, if you were just doing all this on paper, you would be looking through 3 different books, rolling dice 4 times, trying to sort a bunch of chits out of a bag. It's like it's not to say that there are no analogs for this kind of thing in purely traditional game format, but I feel that with an app-supported game, you can do something that goes a lot more complex without that being translated to the player in a negative way.
Yeah, so you can have complexity without putting a burden on the player to manage it.
Without having a scenario where the player is like, okay, now stop, we need to go to this table, we need to roll these dice, and then 10 minutes later you figure out what happened.
Right, yeah. So to your other point, it's kind of an ease of use and accessibility, I guess.
Well, not just 10 minutes later you find out what happened, but 10 minutes later you find out what happened, and then 2 turns after that you realize you flipped to the wrong page, and so now we need to go back and sort of retcon everything that happened for the past half hour out because we made a mistake. And, having the app sort of neatly avoids those problems.
Yes. Okay. That's a good point, because I'm like, as soon as you said that, I'm like, yep, I have done that exact same thing when flipping through one of those books. So curious, like in terms of like the world and the characters that you've seen from Sea of Legends, like what do you find like most intriguing? Like, I guess what I'm maybe asking is like, do you have a sense of the kind of the stories you want to tell with Sea of Legends? Like any little tidbits or previews of what you've been thinking about maybe?
Yeah, well, I mean, so the thing that I find most interesting about Sea of Legends is all of the sort of non-player factions that are involved. And the, more so than any individual faction, I love what you can get by bouncing 2 of those factions against one another. It's the British Empire versus merfolk versus skeletons, and it's like I love the idea of well, what do you get if you take the British Armada in the days of sail and put them up against the Kraken.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a lot of ripe opportunity for really fun storytelling that comes from the sort of really well developed factions, some of which are very fantastical and some of which feel more rooted in the real world. And so it's like it sort of hits at what I like about Shadowrun, taking different genres and mashing them together and coming up with something that is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like anything that like Jordan has a hand in, he's gonna like, there's gonna be a little fantastical twist to it almost.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point there, something I was thinking about was with those factions, like I love that where your mind is going is like, what is the unique story that only this combination tells?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's something great that is great with the app, that we can have that come to the players when it's relevant, and then otherwise it just sits back in the background and they don't have to worry about it at all.
Right. Yeah.
I'm imagining a white whale Ahab story now, but with a sea monster.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like, what sort of fun things could you do with, it's like the British Admiralty feeling the need to foil a political marriage between the merfolk and, and Spain. I think that there are a lot of fun things that you could do.
Yeah. Like, oh, they're about to get married and there's finally going to be peace between the merfolk and humankind. And then the British Empire is like, oh, we can't have that because then they'll become too powerful. Great. I'm super excited to see what your stories shape up to be. So yeah, for fans of Shadowrun, which you kind of already touched on, and so maybe more so we'll focus on BattleTech, what do you think for fans of those games might appeal to them about Sea of Legends?
Well, I think that sort of on a thematic level, you've got a few things going on. You've got that sort of mashup of genres that you get in Shadowrun and also to an extent in BattleTech. In Shadowrun, fantasy and science fiction; in BattleTech, that sort of dynastic, feudalistic story with giant robots. And it's like in Sea of Legends, you've got pirate fiction that is both realistic and fantastical, and you get to see them combined in interesting and fun ways. And then, I think the other fun thematic element to Sea of Legends is that, much like in Shadowrun and also, a lot of the player experience in BattleTech, you are not necessarily playing you're not playing the heroes of the story. I mean, you're the protagonists, but you are a ship of rogues, and that's a lot of fun to embody.
Yeah, you're not necessarily the good guys. You could be the rogue with the heart of gold, but it's more likely you might just be a rogue.
Yeah. I mean, and there's space for all of that, right? I mean, but your goal is to an extent going to be defined by the game, but the general goal of a pirate is personal enrichment. It is not saving the world. And so that's always it's always fun to sit down at a table when everybody is in that same boat. Literally.
There we go. We needed a ship pun in here. Yes. But it is sort of similar to the role of being a mercenary in the BattleTech world, where if you end up doing some good and get paid while you're doing it, then hey, no harm, no foul.
But your primary objective is to keep the lights on.
Exactly. And one of the things that I think I'm most personally excited about, to answer my own question, but I thought you might find this interesting, is like we've really taken a lot of lessons learned from working on BattleTech, and specifically my role is more focused on the systemic content in the event system. And so one of the things that I was really excited about in the event system was trying to tell more procedural story arcs that would really focus on how the mech warriors change and develop based on your leadership as a commander. And in that same sense, we're doing that with Sea of Legends and with like the main quests that your captains go on. That golden path is shared between players as well. So we have these stories shifting and changing based on the player's choice, not being completely bespoke, but actually pulling from all these disparate elements and deciding what's most interesting. Well, there's a sea monster on the loose. They threw this undead priest in jail. So, next up, we're going to have, these undead recruit player 2 to break that undead priest out of jail so they can go, take down the sea monster. And that's really cool to me, because we can basically tell a unique story in each game session with this dynamic content. And from like a scope point of view, you might appreciate this as you've been this is a little inside baseball, but like, the more you add to a branching narrative, the more unwieldy and gigantic it becomes, right?
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
But in this case, we just have these different, buckets essentially that we can keep putting the new stories and new content into, and just select them as they are relevant to the player's story. Which
is really, really cool. Yeah, I mean, when I spoke about choice versus illusion of choice before, in a typical video game situation, when you've got branching choice, there is often a point at which scope dictates that you have to take your branches and fold them back into the main line narrative. If you get a true choice every time you get options, then your conversation, your story, your everything is this stunningly complex tree that you will never, ever, ever finish. And so being able to work with a system like this that allows for a lot more divergent storytelling without having to worry about those concerns is really exciting.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Andrew. We're really excited you're on board with the whole I was gonna say, what's the whole crew, I guess. I'm using all the puns, I'm not even trying to, here for Sea of Legends. And just thanks for chatting, and can't wait for this game to come out.
Yeah, always a pleasure chatting, Ryan. Thank you for having me, and very happy to be a part of it.